I would like to welcome everyone to ACE's Microsoft Dynamics GP 50 Tips and Tricks in 50 Minutes. My name is Lisa Dunham, and I'm the Client Development Specialist for ACE Microtechnology. Presenting today's recorded webinar is Laura Murphy, Director of Consulting for ACE. Laura will also be holding a session at this year's GPUG Summit in Phoenix, Arizona. For those that haven't registered for Summit, please do so by June 28th to receive $400 off plus an additional 10% off with ACE's code. If you do have a question during the webinar, please type your question into the box at the bottom right hand of your screen. We will be leaving 5 minutes after the presentation for Q&A. Now, without further ado, I present to you Laura Murphy.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. I appreciate the time you're giving us today. We're going to be covering a lot of stuff, but the goal today is really to introduce you to some of the ways that you can enhance your experience with Dynamics GP. Now, most of the screens that you'll see today are from Dynamics GP 2018, which was released last December. However, there may be some specific areas that are only available in 2018 and not in prior versions. And I'll try to call those out for you when that is actually the case. It's very few, to be honest. So we're going to be covering topics, general ledger, accounts payable, accounts receivable, fixed assets, sales order processing, purchase order processing, inventory payroll, the PSTL, or otherwise known as Professional Services Tools Library, reporting system, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. There's a lot to cover. Each area has upwards of 3 to 7 slides or topics each that we're going to be covering. So hopefully this will, you'll get a lot out of this today. Some tips for navigating today. We're going to move really fast. I have a lot to cover, and some of the concepts are a little complicated, which means that there's some extra slides that I want to run through. Each slide will include the steps needed to navigate to the window shown whenever it's possible. And every tip has a number on it. So as you're kind of coming up with questions and putting them in the chat room, go ahead and jot that question, that number down associated to that topic, and it will be a lot easier to follow up on. And for any questions that we don't get to today, we will follow up after this webinar to try and get you the answers that you're looking for. So let's start. So the first thing that we're going to start talking about is general ledger. Allow account entry. The allow account entry in your under cards financial account, when you're creating a new GL account, this box defaults with a check mark in it, okay, which means that any transaction anywhere can be entered at any time. But the key thing that you want to look at in this particular box is to understand if that GL account is actually going to tie specifically to a subledger account, like accounts payable, accounts receivable, banking, cash, inventory, that kind of thing. Because when you are doing your month-end reconciliations and you want to keep your subledgers tied to your general ledger, by unchecking this box, you will be able to know that all of that is kept in sync. The only transactions that will be allowed to be processed against that GL account have to come from the subledger. You won't be able to just arbitrarily enter a journal entry and thus causing your account to get out of sync with the subledger. Now, it's entirely possible that at times you definitely need to fix something, and that's fine. You can come in here, mark to allow account entry, go do your journal entry to get everything synced up, then go back and unmark it, because the tighter you keep that reconciliation, the easier your month-end close will be. Number 2, account alias. Account alias is fundamentally the short name of a GL account, okay? But it has a little specific function that can be used by the end users who need to sometimes try and remember all the GL accounts that you have in your chart. So if I'm in the middle of entering a GL transaction, and whether it's a distribution on a subledger or just a journal entry, and I don't know what account I need to find. I know that this is a postage account. So if I know what that alias is or what that short name is, I can click the blue arrow, I can enter that name, and as soon as I tab off of that field, that alias field, GP finds the right account associated, and it automatically populates it in the transaction window. So you don't have to necessarily memorize the entire chart of accounts and know everything. You can know these short names and utilize them to your advantage. Number 3, account roll-up. Account roll-ups allow you to create inquiries that combine multiple GL accounts. You know, right now you can go into inquiry, pull up an account, and see all the activity and summary totals on it. However, if you want to, say, bring all of your sales accounts together and see it all in one screen, you either have to come up with a smart list or you have to run some sort of a long trial balance report. So, but this can be a very quick way of just kind of combining those accounts into a custom inquiry screen so that you have a really, really quick view. You can actually even ratchet that up and get a little bit more complicated and bring in actual and budget and define a variance. When you are ready to create that custom query, you just give the query a name. I'm calling it sales, and I'm adding that to my query, my custom query list. From here, I'm determining how many columns that I want, and sometimes it's just one, and I just want to see combined accounts all added together. Other times, like in a more complex kind of concept where I'm looking at variances between budget and actual numbers, then I'm going to have 3. But I'm going to define each type of account structure that I'm bringing in. When I define the budget, the first thing I'm asked to do is select one of my GP budgets that I'm going to be comparing these actual numbers to, and I have to select that and populate that under the selection window. The variance then is a calculated field. So I'm going to have to come up with what that calculation looks like. So as soon as I do that, I can click the blue arrow and I'm taken to a calculation screen where I can then create my budget versus actual variance column with the math associated to it. So in this case, I'm subtracting my actual from my budget and coming up with my variance number. So once I go back into save this and go back into my inquiry screen, here I have exactly what I was looking for. I have actual sales, budgeted sales, and the variance between the two. Now, going back here, if you notice at the bottom of my setup window for creating my options, this is where I'm going to select my account numbers. And I can do this by, by the account range. I can do it by department. Maybe you want to bring departments in. All of that is doable so that the end result that you see is the numbers that you're trying to get a very quick visual on what's happening with those accounts. And this can be very handy as you're kind of getting ready to kind of do your month-end close to really focus on those areas that look a little out of sync for you. Number 4, copy-paste JEs. We've had this feature for a little bit now, but you do have the ability to create a journal entry and by copying and pasting from an Excel spreadsheet. You're going to fill in the whole header information of the journal entry. You're going to position your cursor into the very first field of the account number, that very first segment. And when you create your Excel spreadsheet, it's got to be a very specific form. This is the form right here that you have to use. It can be as long as you want. It can have as many entries as you want. And when you're done, then you're going to highlight in Excel that whole range of what that entry is going to look like. And then go back into your journal entry screen and click the paste button. Because your cursor was in that very first segment of the account number on the very first line of the account number grid, you are, it's going to populate all of that information for you. And And again, it doesn't matter how long it is. You can put as much in there as you can. Keep in mind that transactions that have different dates are going to need to be in separate journal entries. You're not going to be able to add extra lines after the fact. So once you paste your first journal entry into this window, the paste button grays out and you will not be able to paste again. Number 5, transaction matching. Transaction matching is an interesting little concept that not a lot of people use, but I like it for very specific reconciliations. Say, for example, you advance your employees on occasion $100, $300, whatever the case may be, and you're tracking those advances into one general ledger account number. So each individual person then is going to pay back on whatever that advance based on whatever agreement has been made. But how do you know if they're paying it out over time, what they ever have left? You have the option of creating more GL accounts, but who really wants to do that? With transaction matching, I actually have the ability to create a named link, transaction matching link, and mark those transactions associated, in this case, to that employee, so that I know, based on what's been marked, exactly what she has remaining. So she received a $350 advance and has been paying it back in $100 increments over the course of a few months. She only has $50 left, and we see that based on this link. And we can update this link as more transactions happen over the course of time. She may get another advance. She may pay that off differently, and so on. So we're continuing to add and take care of keeping track of who owes what to whom. You have some reports that are available for transaction matching, which again helps with managing the balance due or whatever reconciling element that you're trying to accomplish with transaction matching. You also have an inquiry that gives you kind of the same general information that you have in the original saved transaction. One of the things to note with transaction matching is that we are matching transactions in GP that have already posted. You're not going to match transactions as they're taking place in the process. You're going back in after the fact and you're saying these things come together and clear themselves out, match themselves out. It doesn't necessarily have to net to zero. Over a period of time, it may. It could be that you're just accumulating costs associated to a specific very large purchase, like you bought a fixed asset of some kind or a piece of property, and all the different components of costs are all going to be tracked so that you can kind of gather all that information easily and be able to report on exactly what those costs were in detail and in summary. Moving on to accounts payable. Edit, payment, match, column control. So for those of you who have experience doing a check run in accounts payable, when you have built your batch and you want to kind of tweak it, you go into your edit payment batch. But if you're validating those entries, those checks or invoices that you're going to pay against the actual physical copy, the default column to match that is the voucher number. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't really track by voucher number. I track by document number when I've got that document sitting in front of me. But you have a column button here on the right that pops up a list customization where you can uncheck the voucher number and check the document number. You can also add additional columns if you want to. Once you do that, then it replaces the voucher number with the document number, and now I have something that actually matches to the paper that's sitting in front of me, and I can move forward with my payments. Number 7, remit to address. We've had this for a really long time too, but I wanted to make sure everybody is aware that the remit to address really does facilitate your ability to use one vendor that has multiple addresses, and some of those multiple addresses you actually remit checks to. So GP is smart enough to know that if you enter an invoice with a remit to address, then enter another invoice using the same vendor to another remit to address, During a check run, it actually automatically runs separate checks for you so that the address on the check goes to the right place. So it's really important that you understand how handy this will be when you're trying to, at that check run time, when you don't have all of your AT&T invoices showing up on one check. That's the critical path to keep all of that under control, especially for those vendors who want that one check per invoice kind of experience from you. So, but you know, what happens when it doesn't go well? What happens if you have to come back and find out that they all use the same remit to address, and now the check's going to go to one place? Well, by using the edit transaction information, number 8 tip, you can actually change the remit to address prior to doing your check run process, so that GP now knows to split those invoices across the specific remit to addresses and cut checks accordingly. Number 8, number 9, update 1099 information. You're up, you know, most of the time by the end of the year, we are kind of getting into our brain that we now need to kind of deal with our 1099 vendors and get ready to send out 1099s. But this screen here under Transactions Update 1099 Information actually allows you to change not only your tax type and the box that the dollars go to for the 1099 itself, but it actually allows you to change the 1099 amount. So in this example where Beaumont Construction actually had a $100,000 invoice, we've determined that only $75,000 of it is 1099able. We can go into this screen right here and make that change so that once we're ready to generate our 1099s, we've already gone through and corrected all of the mistakes that have been made throughout the year. The other thing that you can do is to update your 1099 information itself, where you have vendors that haven't been correctly tagged as a 1099 vendor. Everything that they have has for 1099 is showing up as 0. So through this utility, you actually have the ability to switch your 1099 vendors or your non-1099 vendors to a status of 1099, and it will go out and automatically fix all the invoices that you've generated for them and reclass them to being 1099able. So having said that, you want to be really careful. You still have the ability to go back to that other window and tweak and adjust those amounts in a more granular fashion, but you can definitely do a lot of work very quickly to true up your 1099 year-end process by using this window and the transaction window to update your individual 1099 invoices. Number 10, check please, no invoice. A lot of times you don't realize that you really don't need to have an invoice to generate a check from a vendor, okay? Now, do you want to? Of course you do. But sometimes the check needs to come first before you ever get the invoice. So you want to make sure that instead of going kind of outside the box or entering a fake invoice that is really not the true picture of what has happened, you use the edit vendor payment window to enter an amount. In this instance, we're putting a $1,000 deposit down for Ace Travel Company, and I don't have an invoice yet. So I'm going to go ahead and process this check. What happens is that I end up with a credit on the Ace vendor, Ace Travel Company vendor account. I want that. I end up debiting my accounts payable and crediting cash, which is also what I want. It's just that the invoice hasn't, part of this hasn't happened yet. So what I want to do is go ahead and process through this. But once my invoice does come in, I'm going to enter it, and then I'm going to marry those two transactions together so that I'm going to apply this payment that came ahead of time to this invoice that has now been posted. Whatever's remaining is remaining. So I may have a $9,000 invoice, and I'm going to apply this $1,000 payment to it, leaving a balance of $8,000. That's perfect. because this was just a deposit, not the whole amount. But now everything historically on that vendor has been kept accurate. Everything has been kept in sync, and in the general ledger is also where it needs to be as well. Distribution types. It's important for you guys to know that how the distribution types kind of match between the distribution window and the main payables entry window. Oftentimes when we're in the process of entering transactions and we're trying to save or post that transaction, we'll get a distribution error or where they're out of balance. So having the right type associated to the transaction represented on the main screen is really the key to eliminating that error message from popping up. Of course, your distribution has to be in balance. Debits have to equal credits. But where I have $2,500 in this example under purchases, I also have an account and a purchase type so that all of this stays in check. If they do get out of sync for whatever reason, and that happens often enough, the easiest way to fix that is just by clicking back into your distribution window, click default, and letting GP true that transaction up for you and put everything in the right place. Don't necessarily try and fix it yourself, but if you do, understand how it links to that main screen so you keep everything where it needs to be. Enhanced payment terms. One of the latest updates to GP has been an enhancement to this payment terms window. We now have the ability to add some complexity to how GP calculates the due date for an invoice, either in payables or in receivables. You've got some new options under your drop downs for calculate days from and for your discount dates. The nice thing, and what I kind of think is really fun part of this, is that once you kind of get that down to how you want that those terms to be, you can hit this calculate button up at the top, and it's going to give you hopefully the results you're looking at. So it's a way to test your calculation without actually putting it on a transaction where it's not going to come up properly. So use that calculate button once you kind of set everything up and see if the results meet your expectations. Accounts receivable, write-offs. GP has the ability to mass write-off amounts of or balances. They could be an overpayment or an underpayment associated to your customers. The key to being able to do this, though, is you have to make sure that in your customer maintenance options that anything other than not allowed is marked. If you have not allowed, then no overpayment and no underpayment will ever be able to be written off. You have to fix that part up front for all your customers so that you've got something that you can control. As you're going through the process of determining what the parameters for this write-up actually is, you can define that here in the main write-off documents window, and then click preview. Once you click preview, you actually get to see exactly what GP intends to write off and what that write-off amount is. We had a $100 limit, so what we see on the screen here actually meets that criteria. Every one of these that's blue and underlined, obviously you can drill back on, so you can see exactly what's making up that $30.50, that $21.35, and see those transactions. And if you're not comfortable with writing those off, then you can uncheck the box to the left and remove those from this process. Once you click OK, you come back to this window and then click process. For underpayments, GP is going to issue a credit memo and automatically apply it. For overpayments, GP will issue debit memos and apply it to those overpayment amounts. Number 14, locate by customer. When we receive a payment from a customer, most of the time we only receive the invoice number. We don't know who the customer is, or we don't really know what their customer ID is. So in this locate customer by document, field, we can just enter the invoice number that's on the check stub or the remittance statement. And once we tab off of that, GP will automatically find the correct customer and apply that document and the amount to the open invoice that was entered there. So as we go through this process, we enter our sales invoice. It notates, oops, went a little too far. It notates what we want to, who this customer is, and it moves on through and applies everything where we need it to. Number 15, refunds. GP gives you the ability to refund customers by linking your AP module with your AR module, your AR module with your AP module. The process to do this will actually create a check batch where you can then do a check run for all of your refunds. To do this, you have to have both a customer and a vendor that exists. Obviously, you have a customer that you want to refund. So once we identify who that customer is, we can come in here and see all the available refunds we want to make, mark those, click OK. And once we do that, we can see in that grid that while we have a customer and an amount, we don't have a vendor. So we need to create a vendor. When we click on vendor, it takes us to the vendor maintenance screen. And with all the information that it will bring over from the customer maintenance screen and create a vendor for us. Once we save that, we can then see that it populates there, and we can process our refund check. Number 16, paid transaction removal. Your month-end close process should always, always, always include the paid transaction removal routine. This process takes all of your fully paid sales invoices that have a status of open and moves them, excuse me, into history. So anything, of course, that gets moved into history then removes off your aging. So this gives you the ability to kind of keep your agings cleaned up, a lot easier to manage without a whole lot of stuff on them. And the whole process of eliminating those historical transactions then makes other queries and reports run faster, because it's basically pulling from open transactions, not from historical. So keep that in mind as your, as part of your month-end close routine. It's going to be really, really important for you to maintain your agings, as most of you always know. Now, all of that's fine and good, but what happens if we find out later, once we've moved it to history, that it's been applied to the wrong invoice, or maybe it's been entered, that payment was entered onto the wrong account, and we've moved an invoice and payment over to history that doesn't belong there? Using the Professional Services Tools Library, or the PISTOL, as some people call it, we can actually do what's called RM transaction unapply. That essentially takes those historical transactions and brings them back into open, where we can then correct them as we need to. So when we select that option and we select the customer, we handpick the invoice that we want to unapply. And once we click OK on that, it comes back and we can move forward. Fixed assets. Fixed asset, we now have the ability under fixed assets to auto-assign asset numbers by their class. So in this example, we have furniture that we want to, that is also a class, and we want to have a prefix of FURN with a number that, increments automatically. So this is a new feature that kind of helps you, report on and control all of your asset acquisitions. Fixed asset groups. Fixed assets has the ability under select assets to kind of pool assets together based on specific criteria. Because it brings it into a grid like this, you can actually cherry pick those assets that have some sort of common connection or unique connection that makes it important for them to exist in a group, where you want to depreciate on them, you want to report on them, you want to make mass changes against those assets. Maybe you want to retire on all of them. There's a lot of reasons why you might want to do this, but establishing the group and what's in that group first is done in this window here. Number 20, fixed asset calendars. As you know, depreciation doesn't always follow a fiscal year. For example, depreciation for a corporate book may follow the fiscal year, while depreciation for the tax book may actually follow the calendar year. So you have the option to set up multiple calendars and assign different calendars to different books. To do that, you do that in your book setup and assign, all the appropriateness there, and it actually controls those things. You depreciate in that fashion, you close the year in that fashion based on all of this information, and you determine what those calendars look like. Fixed asset historical report, that is really very similar to an aging report. It has an as of date, and that's kind of a new feature that came up a couple of versions ago that has been missing for a long time. So this is really critical for reconciling and auditing your fixed assets. So that as of date gives you that look back to review your fixed assets, historically, and again, helping you to keep your fixed asset subledger in check with your general ledger. There's a fixed asset modifier in the PSTL tool that allows you to actually change your existing asset IDs to something that makes the most sense. I mean, think about the fact that we now turned on the default asset IDs based on the class. Now, that's great going forward for all the new assets that are, furniture based, but what happens to all the old ones? They're still using that old protocol. So the fixed asset modifier actually lets us change our fixed asset IDs so that we now have a whole list of fixed assets that's using the same naming convention or ID convention. The window to do that is very easy. You enter the existing asset number and you tell it what the new asset number is. We have other modifiers that are available for the other modules, AR for customers, for vendors, etc. And those actually have the ability to upload a file. Unfortunately, fixed asset doesn't at this point, so you have to do that one at a time. Sales order processing. For those of you using the SOP modules, one of the things that you may not realize is that you can actually have negative lines inside of a sales entry window. The key to getting this to work is to always make your quantity negative, keep your unit price positive. GP will actually allow you to do the opposite when you're entering this transaction, but it won't post your transaction. It will actually tell you that you can't do this, when in fact you actually can. Just make sure that you've configured it properly so that it's negative quantity, positive unit price. You can actually have enough credits in an invoice that the total is actually negative. This will post as well as long as you have configured it properly. But keep in mind that it does not magically in the posting process change this to a return type or a credit memo type. It's still going to be an invoice type. And when you're trying to apply this negative invoice to an open invoice, there's some extra steps that you have to go through to make that happen, because GP naturally only recognizes that a credit or a return would be applied to an invoice. So it can be done, but there's some additional steps you have to take to make that happen. You may be in a situation where for your data entry clerks, you want to hide the item cost from them while they're entering the invoices, the sales order processing invoices. That's just a setup in sales order processing. You can mark display or check or uncheck the display item unit cost. So if you uncheck this, then when they're entering that, the unit cost will not be displayed. They won't be able to see this. Now, the caveat to this is that If they go into, after they've processed this and they go into an inquiry screen, they actually can see it from there. For whatever reason, this only handles the sales transaction entry screen. It doesn't handle this, follow through with the same concept in the inquiry screen. So you may have to use security to kind of to deal with the hide costs on from an inquiry perspective. Another PSTL tool is the SOP PO number check. So one of the things so what this does is, if you are entering in an sales order processing invoice, you actually have to, you don't know if that PO that you've entered has already been used before. So GP actually goes in and allows you to, well, turn this on, and then it will check that for you across your history tables, your open tables, and make sure that if there's it sees that that PO was used before, it will let you know, and you can kind of investigate at that point if this isn't actually a duplicate order or invoice that you're trying to enter. You can define that based on the actual types of documents that you want to do this check against. And typically that's going to be orders and invoices, but it will actually tell you how many other times it finds that PO number being used. And then you can determine in the setup what the action item is if that error message pops up. 26, custom link. Custom link is really a great, fun way of being able to drill back on using a tracking number directly to FedEx, DHL, UPS, and it links right directly to their website, and you can track that item right from the SOP screen. There's a custom link setup window under administration that you would align this to and create this link. And then as soon as you save that, the next time you come into that window, you see that that is going to link to a FedEx number, and you can click that link and go right to their website, and it will give you immediately the where that package is. Number 27, create a return. From the sales order processing window, if you click additional create return, you can very easily create a return associated to a customer and a specific invoice that you are returning some or all of the items that were invoiced. Once you select the sales document, it comes up with a grid where you can select which items you're actually returning, all or one or some. As soon as you click post, it populates the return for you with all of those items automatically, so that you don't have to do a lot of data entry. Really, really great and fast way to create a return. Purchase order processing. The first thing is the POP cost defaulter. So in inventory, you can, by default, POs default their cost from the current cost field in the inventory module. But sometimes on an inventory item, in some instances, you'd rather have standard costs be reflected. That's the cost that you want to go by on your purchase order. So the cost defaulter actually lets you define that in this utility to change from current cost over to standard cost. Now, the key to this is that it's all or nothing. You can't say this item is going to be standard cost and this item is going to be current cost. You're turning this on so that all of your POs that you generate are going to be based on that standard cost field. But the nice thing is that you can control what's reflected on those POs by pulling in that standard cost, something that we weren't able to do a long time ago. Remove completed POs, number 29. Most of the time during the normal PO three-way match process, once the purchase order has completely been fulfilled, it moves itself into history and you're done. But occasionally there are those times when you have POs that where lines have to be canceled or something wasn't quite fulfilled and they never seem to get over to history. They just keep showing up as open. So using your remove completed POs routine, you can actually manage that and move those to history when you know for certain that those POs are are really 100% complete. And this process will only allow you to move to history those items it deems eligible. So if there's still things pending that you need to fix on that PO, then it's going to wait and not show up in the window as being an eligible move until you've done those steps. Number 30, warn if vendor has open POs. So this is a great tool, because when we're sitting in purchase order and we're also doing AP transactions, if an invoice that's PO related lands on the AP clerk's desk, she may not know that there's an open PO on this. Well, now she can be warned before she enters that transaction. And then it becomes a point of conversation is, do I want to continue with this AP transaction because it really isn't related to an open purchase order, or do I need to take this someplace else? Because we all know that if we enter an AP transaction and there is an open PO and we're waiting on the invoice to close that PO down, once we enter that, and if we don't catch it till later, we never really get an opportunity very easily to close that PO fully and move it to history. You can't really go backwards from AP to purchase orders. So catching that ahead of time is key to keeping that kind of situation under control. Number 31, received not invoiced report. SmartList has a shipments received but not invoiced SmartList report that you can run, that what you should be using on a monthly basis to keep your accrued purchases GL account tied to your subledger, your receiver's subledger. Now, the one thing that you're going to need to do, though, is to add to this canned report, this canned query, the extended cost column, and then you can export it out to Excel, total it, and that's the number that should, for you, that extended cost total should tie to your accrued purchases account. This report also comes as an Excel-based report. It also is available as an SSRS report. So you have a lot of different reporting tools that can give you the same information. Number 32, all-in-one view. This is kind of a recent add where we can see just in one place the POs that we've generated and all associated documents. For example, you know, in that three-way match process, you have the PO, you have the receiver, and you have the invoice. You can see all of that. So whichever one we want to look at, we're going to check the box to the right of it. As soon as we do that, in this case, the 20431, as soon as I check a box, the screen will automatically refresh and tell me only those associated documents that belong to this particular PO. And it doesn't matter. I can, pick an invoice and it will refresh and just give me the right PO and the right receiver. Just you can control that. The other thing that you can do is click that down arrow, and it's going to give you additional information associated to that particular transaction that you're kind of looking at right now. It's a really, really handy tool. Moving on to inventory. Inventory now has reason codes. Reason codes is really just a way of you having giving you an extra way to identify how inventory is moving through your warehouses, why they're being moved. And what I like most about it is the fact that I can actually control where my general ledger, how I'm posting to the general ledger using this tool. It's not a required field on any of your transactions, but if you are using inventory heavily and you're using reason codes, sometimes you want the general ledger account to kind of be synced up. Again, that's that general ledger reconciliation to your subledger, that you can kind of keep those things in sync as you're moving things through your warehouses and through your general ledger for your financial purposes. So keep that in mind as you're doing this. Once I do a transaction in this example, as soon as I establish what I'm doing in the type and establish that reason code, my distribution automatically updates with the correct inventory offset account. So again, really, really handy way of managing this. If you have or are creating new sites, you've got a new warehouse, you've got a new location, or maybe you just have a whole batch of new inventory items that you've added into your inventory list. This is where you can very quickly assign that site to all of the sites to those inventory items, or all of the inventory items to this new site. You're basically going to come in here and say, everything needs to be able to be handled in every warehouse in this example, or you can be very granular and say only certain items. But instead of doing it one site at a time, one item at a time, this does it in mass for you. All right, this is something that I don't see a lot of people using, and I really like this tool. So if you, again, you're heavy inventory user in Dynamics GP, it's, you know, in order to really kind of control your inventory and the bulk of your items from a count perspective and a value perspective, there's an ABC analysis wizard where you can flag your inventory items as having an A, B, or C category or no category at all. By processing through this wizard, you actually get to come up with the best way to kind of, you know, segregate your inventory in the system by these categories. It's typically kind of based on a 80-20 rule, where 80% of the value of your inventory resides in 20% of the actual items. And then the other items are 15%, 5%, you know, or whatever. So, but here, you know, that could be different for you. GP is going to allow you through this wizard process to kind of define that. And you can run this as many times as you want so that you can kind of continue to tweak and adjust where these items sit. So you're going to be processing through this wizard. You're going to be answering some questions as to, you know, how GP wants to calculate this. And at the end of this process, you're going to click the preview button. The preview button is where you can actually get really granular, and you can go through your entire inventory list and see what it's currently set at under this current ABC column, and what GP, based on its analysis, is now suggesting. You have the ability to change this for yourself and make your own decision, or uncheck it completely and not include them at all, so that you're not, you know, you don't want to maybe overblow it. Maybe you want to just do one particular kind of category or of inventory, kind of play around with that. But I really like this tool, because once I click OK on this and finish this using this wizard, then it's going to process through and automatically update my ABC code on every single one of my items that I was processing in my wizard. So it's a great way to mass change this particular field in the inventory module for all of your items, or the ones that you definitely want to keep a better eye on. So, and then this may change over time. You may have items that are super popular and are really moving, and then they kind of fall off, and others take their place. Again, you can run this as many times as you want. The other thing is that you can connect this to your cycle counts, so that you can actually kind of create your cycle counts associated to your ABC code. And this is going to be really important to, maybe you cycle count all of your A stuff every month, but you do your B and C stuff every quarter, or your C stuff just once a year. It just depends on how kind of you want to manage your warehouses and the inventory that you have there. Really, really great tool, very underutilized. It's really easy to create a new item using the copy feature. On the item maintenance screen, you're going to give it a new, whatever that new item number is. You're going to click copy, and then on that screen, you're going to identify what item you're copying it from, and then also what attributes you are copying over. You can do all or pick the ones that you want. Once you click copy, then it's going to populate all of the information for you on all of the associated windows. So this doesn't have to be a hugely time-consuming process for you. It can be very quick, and then you just tweak and adjust the specifics based on the uniqueness of this particular item. Number 37, over under tolerances. This actually helps you control the tolerance percentage on your PO receivers. So if you establish that a shortage of 10% is acceptable, then GP, anything within that window, GP is going to automatically cancel the remaining items on the purchase order for you, or do a change order, whatever needs, it's going to automatically take care of that. Outside of that window, though, it's going to give you an error message and want you to make a decision. Same thing with overages. So if you order 100 of something and they send you 110, you're good. It's going to allow you to take that, receive in all 110 of those. But if you receive 111, it's going to give you an error message, and because it's outside that tolerance, and you're going to need to make a decision. So determine what those tolerances are for you, if any, and it's an item by item distinction. So to help you kind of manage a little bit easier some of those discrepancies that happen in the receiving process. Payroll. Payroll, number 38, is we have a mass transaction entry. So it's not unusual in payroll to have to roll out the same one-time transaction to a large group of your employees. Perhaps it's to a specific class of employees. Maybe there's a certain group that's getting bonuses. This window allows you the ability to capture the employees and the amount associated to this transaction. So we can, in this example, we're paying a $500 bonus to everybody in the company, but this is only going to do that to those people that have the bonus pay code set up on their account. So once I click preview, then I can see exactly who's in that list. And I have the ability to control this here and say, oh, wait, that test employee, no, I don't think I'm going to include them, and uncheck them if I need to. When I'm good with the list, then I'm going to build the batch. And that process actually then creates a batch in transactions that's ready to mark and process with your normal payroll check run. 39, posting edit list. The posting edit list allows you to review the GL accounts that are going to be posted to once you complete your payroll process. You have to have the edit financial fields box marked in the setup window in order to be able to do that. But once you have that, then you can run the posting edit list under transactions, and you can actually correct the GL account numbers in this window before you actually post anything, because fixing this after the fact can be painful. Researching it can be painful. So let's do it before it ever occurs. This does not change your payroll posting account setup. If you've got a discrepancy or an error that you have to fix, you want to go back in, correct it in the mapping in your posting account setups, payroll posting account setup window, so that it doesn't happen again. But at least for now, in this payroll, you can keep moving forward, fix it here, move forward, and not have to worry about this particular one. There's also a payroll pre-posting distribution. It's a little bit of a misnomer, but in terms of how it's describing, it's really not about distributions from a GL perspective. It's really all about payroll taxes and the taxable wages. So the key thing is that in your posting setup for payroll, this box has to be marked, and by default it is not. So you're probably going to have to go back in there and mark that. This runs automatically for you after you run calculate checks, and this is kind of a sample of the report that comes out. You can see that the taxable wages for each individual person is X, and it's calculating, a certain amount of what the employee will pay, or even the employer pays on anything that's matching. So this gives you that kind of precursor to, especially with new employees that you may be setting up, that everything seems to look okay in terms of how they've been set up, and gives you an opportunity to go back, fix them for this taxable wage concept, and kind of catch yourself before it's too late, because this part can be super hard to fix after the fact. Very painful. PSTL, or Professional Services Tools Library. We've been talking about this throughout the webinar, different examples of them, but there are a few more that I really think would be valuable to you. So, and I know we're running a little bit long, talking as fast as I can. We're getting there. The Select Check Combiner actually makes GP take when you're doing a check run, and you actually add to the check run for payables after the fact, and you're going to end up with 2 vendor checks. This actually, during that add process, combines those checks for you, so you don't end up with 2 checks. Master triggers actually will write and create the master customer, vendor, or GL account to another database after you've created it from one. So you don't have to go into the other database and create it there as well. So it eliminates that double entry for you. Doc date verify. All right, so we've all had the issue, I think, where somebody keys in some date from the 1800s or some date to the 24th century. All right, GP shouldn't allow it, but let's be honest, it does. But doc date verify actually, if you turn this on, will validate the date that's being keyed and only allow those things where a fiscal period exists. So it really gives you that extra kind of tight control on those dates, because again, fixing these things after the fact, also very painful. Reporting. Smart List Designer is a way for you to create custom smart lists. It is reasonably user-friendly. You just need to have you probably need to be an intermediate or somewhat advanced user of GP to know how data moves through GP. But, and it looks a little intimidating, but it's actually more user-friendly than what you might think. The names are not SQL names, they're more friendly names that you can pick and choose and create custom smart lists that maybe cross tables or even cross modules. So again, with some practice and some training, you can be doing this yourself and creating some really great reports that even are already filtered or even have some calculations in them. 45, Excel-based reports are, and 46. I'm going to combine these two, but these are additional reports that are available to you, and you should have them deployed. If you don't, go back and check. Either get your IT to deploy them or call us and we'll deploy them for you. There is tons of reports out here available to you that you're not getting to take advantage of if you do not deploy these. Excel reports are refreshable. Excel reports that link directly to the database. So you make a change in GP, you refresh the Excel report, the change is reflected immediately. Same thing with SSRS report. They're connected directly and they're refreshable. A few system things. The posting setup, the tool setup posting here is where you can control how many reports are printing out, because we know that GP will kill a lot of trees posting reports. So in this window, you can control this very easily by just unchecking the report. Your reports are saved for you. You can reprint them. You don't have to have a report for everything. Everything is saved and can be reprinted at a later date. Do it as you need it, not as a default. So turn this stuff off. You have the ability to remove some of your unused security tasks and roles, just to keep that whole concept kind of cleaned up. So you have a utility that does that for you, and it's super helpful when you're navigating through some of the security elements. Again, you have to be a system administrator to do that, but this is out there for you. Field level security is another option for you to kind of get super granular on eliminating access to specific fields on specific windows. In this case, I've decided that on the fiscal period screen, I'm going to disable a calculate button because I don't want all the ramifications of redoing my fiscal periods of what happens to management reporter and what happens to all my summary and having to run reconcile, all of that. So I'm going to eliminate that. So once I do that and hit apply, then the individual that calculate button, they can come in and close and open, but they can't calculate, which then creates its own set of additional tasks. Last one. So advanced account lookups. Advanced account lookups allow you to customize for yourself the lookup options in any of your lookup windows. So by default, you see here we have additional sorts, and that's all we have. We can kind of go into custom sorts and do that, but I'd like that to be less clicky. I'd like that to be a faster process. So by going in and setting up my advanced lookups, I can pull in some of those extra things that I know I'm always going to be looking for when I do my lookups and how I find things. And once I do that, it adds them to that list for me, and I can click there and immediately see what the associated information is. Wow, that was a lot. I know it was a lot. I'm sorry that we're past, but if you can hang, I think I'll turn this back over to Lisa, and we can start taking some questions if anybody can stay with us for about 5 minutes.
Thank you, Laura, for that great presentation on Dynamics GP. So with that, we will go ahead and take some questions. We had one from earlier. Is this available in the online Dynamics portal?
Yes, all of these features, the GP web client is the same as a GP workstation client. So the features are the same. They trued all of that up a couple versions ago, so you're good to go.
Questions, anybody? Type it in the below question chat bar.
So I know this was really, really fast. That's because we're recording this and making this available. I tried to get some of the steps in there for what you do to give you some high level look at, really how to kind of turn some of these features on and to work with them. We are definitely here to help you if you run into any sort of problems as you're trying to look into enhancing your system with some of these features. Some of them may or may not apply to you, but I think if you start playing around with some of these things and know that this functionality is out there, it really can enhance the experience for you.
Let's see, we have another one. We have a few more. What version is Dynamics GP are you using for this seminar?
GP 2018. But everything that I showed you, with the exception of one concept under the payroll module, is available in all, from 2013 to, well, really from 2015 to 2018. So there's only one really new thing that came out, and I didn't touch on it too much even in the payroll module.
Okay. If you correct, if on number 27, if already posted, how do you correct if a credit has been applied to payment? Do you cancel or do you void?
You have to void in order to void that payment. So you can go into your void in AR. You can go into a void and void that cash receipt. Re-enter it to the appropriate customer. Now you don't have to void if it already belongs. If it belongs to the right customer, but you just hit the wrong invoice, you can just apply that to, just hit apply to the correct invoice in the apply sales document window, because that payment is now going to be available to apply to any open invoice that you have at that point. But if it truly goes to another customer, then you're going to have to avoid that payment and re-enter it correctly. Voiding that actually helps true up all of your bank side as well, because cash, of course, is going to affect your GL and your banks.
How does number 10 differ from a prepaid check?
So number 10, I think we're talking about cutting a check for a vendor when you don't have an invoice. So the prepayments actually work really well on the purchase order side, and all of that has a process around it. But if you're not using purchase order processing and you're just using AP, there really isn't a vehicle to do that other than just kind of cutting that check from your edit payment screen to get that check cut and on that vendor record. So it really depends on whether you're running AP or you're running purchase order processing.
There's actually one that I'm able to answer. Yes, a copy of this presentation will be available. Will the slides be made available for attendees? Yes. There's one that says, will a manual be available for this version that we can purchase?
The short answer to that is no. Microsoft has not written any manuals for some time. They have been relying on the what's new documentation that they release for each new version to append to the existing manuals, which kind of go back to really kind of 2010, 2013. So you really almost have to start building some of this content yourself. Now, the help about in GP gives you a lot of information on how to do those, and those are you can print those out if you want to. It's not recommended because it's a lot, but it's there for you to use. Most of the time people are just using the what's new and adding it to the existing manuals that they had from a long time ago.
Looks like we covered all of our questions. Do you have anything else, Laura, you would like to present?
No, I think we're good. Just thank you very much for everybody for attending. I appreciate the time. I'm sorry we went over, but I think it's all good stuff, and I appreciate the questions. Reach out to me directly if you have any additional questions, and we'll try and get those answered for you.
Great. I would like to thank all of our attendees and Laura. This will now conclude our webinar. Thank you all and have a wonderful day.